And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We have so much to talk about today, Shayne. The Steelers' first preseason game against the Texans is in the books. I want to recap that, talk about all the training camp winners and losers, the biggest moments, biggest performances that happened because now training camp is over with. The Steelers just have one joint practice coming up tomorrow with the Bills, but it's not open to the public. We also want to preview the Steelers versus Bills game coming up this weekend. That's their big one. That usually this game in the middle now that we've gone to that 3 preseason game schedule. That's the one where most of the starters should play. We should get our best look at this team and where they stand kind of heading into the season here. So let's dive right into with the news. And obviously we want to talk about Brandon Ayuk here in just a second. So we'll get to that as well. All right, Shayne, during the last training camp practice today, 3 Steelers were banged up with injuries. Jonathan Ward, who was the other one? Graylin Arnold, the cornerback, who was running with the first team at nickel a little bit. And then Nate Herbig. And I know that a lot of people were not pleased with Herbig's performance in the first preseason game. 2 fumble exchanges between him and Justin Fields, but you don't want to see these types of injuries happen just weeks before the start of the season. We don't know what it is at this point as we're recording this here, but we obviously hope that all 3 of these guys can get back on the field and show what they've got right before the season here.
Yeah, and even with Herbig's performance, if you are someone who is worried by it or was upset with how he played, he's still good depth at guard and center if he doesn't start at center, right? And I think that, Frazier played well in that preseason game. We'll talk more about that game a little bit against the Texans, but I think that ultimately he was going to end up being the starting center sooner rather than later. So if, from that perspective, it's not as big of a deal. But he's probably their top guard backup unless McCormick is ready to go as well. So it's going to be depth. It's a depth hit no matter what with him. And then Arnold, like you said, was stealing some reps from Beanie Bishop after kind of, again, we'll talk about a little bit, kind of a rough preseason debut, at least in coverage. So we'll see how that goes. And then Ward kind of had an uphill battle, but he's the type of running back that they kind of look for sometimes in the back end of the depth chart. So too bad for him.
Yeah, and even Ward had a good first preseason game there. He had a nice run, bounced it to the left side, and carried like 20 yards, I think, on that one. But Herbig, that's the big one here because this is projected to be Steelers' starting center going into the season. Now, obviously, there was time for that to change. Maybe Frazier could have leapfrogged beforehand, but you don't want to see the depth of your offensive line hurt in any way. I thought that, now I know the fumbles are a big thing. You can't do that. I mean, these exchanges have to be clean. Those are game changers. But I thought outside of those 2 muffed exchanges there in that preseason game, I thought he played a pretty good game overall. He's a big guy. He can anchor very well. And I'd like to see but I mean, it's not completely unexpected for me, Shayne, a guy who has a handful of center snaps in his first 5 seasons in the NFL to see them have some problems exchanging. I think that he's a guard by trade. And I think that this is the type of stuff you get when you play a guard at center. We saw much of the same with Kendrick Green, but also his struggles were just in every area of the game. Essentially. Frazier's going to be the guy. He's going to get the job eventually. He looks really good. We're going to talk about him in just a little bit here as well. But you don't want to see these type of injuries happen. We'll keep tabs on this and we'll see. Maybe it's something minor and these guys will be able to get back on the field potentially before the final preseason game. Grayson Arnold, though, had to be carted off with the lower leg injury, I think. And so
usually not good.
We'll see what the status is on him. It's not always a super serious thing, as we saw with Roman Wilson was carted off. It ended up being a 2-week-ish injury. And we'll see if he comes back for the preseason finale. He's not going to play this week. But we'll see the severity of that. And anytime you're a roster bubble player already, Shayne, it makes it increasingly hard to crack that final roster spot. If the Steelers are deciding between 2 guys and one is completely healthy and the other is not, that's their decision right there. And so that could be enough to do Grayson Arnold in. And so it's unfortunate just the way these things work out sometimes. So those are the latest camp updates from the final day of Steelers training camp, just wrapped up a few hours ago. Let's talk about the Brandon Ayuk drama again and where we stand in all of this, Shayne, because when we recorded this show last week, I half expected something to be done by now because I think that seems to be where it's trending. And it just, the reports keep flip-flopping back and forth. The Steelers have a trade in place for Brandon Ayuk. And so it's interesting to see that something hasn't been finalized yet. But let me just read this. Came out 3 hours ago from ESPN. The San Francisco 49ers are still trying to work out a long-term contract with Ayuk, but they have also agreed to parameters on a trade that would send the star receiver to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So there is a trade in place. And just like it was Ian Rappaport, I believe, that said, all they have to do is give the sign off, give the thumbs up, pull the trigger. The trade is executed. The parameters of that trade are in place with the Steelers. It's just the 49ers are dragging this thing out. I think that, and I think it's for good reason. I think that they don't want to lose a blue chip piece when they're so close to winning the Super Bowl these last couple of years. So I understand why they're doing it. And from a leverage perspective, like, this couldn't have been any more well played from Ayuk's party. Like, he's milking this thing up for all that it's worth, and he's going to get his bag here pretty soon. But I think that he's kind of waiting to see, or the 49ers are waiting to see if he's going to give them one last shot to match that offer, if they're going to take the offer with the Steelers.
And the thing that frustrates me with this is, again, from Ayuk's perspective, he absolutely played this right. He found out via the trade market that his value is what he says it is. He's going to get that, like, probably close to $30 million a year from, whether it's the Niners or us at this point. He has the leverage in the sense that, again, he wasn't willing to go to certain teams that maybe were willing to offer more than the Steelers were willing to offer. So he did his part in this very well. The thing that frustrates me is the Niners. If I'm a Niners fan, like, I think some front offices are too cute with how they do business, and they don't understand, like, at the end of the day, like, if you want a guy bad enough, if they really think that Ayuk, which I think they should think this, if they think he's the linchpin of their passing game, which he is, in my opinion, I think you lose him. You really have to ask a lot of Ricky Pearsall's rookie. Deebo Samuel is not a pure receiver. He's not going to replicate what Ayuk is doing for you. And as good as Kittle is, even he kind of fluctuates in terms of how effective he is as a volume target, especially, right? He's not one of these tight ends that's in the Kelsey mold that you can give 15 targets to and it's going to work probably really well. So I think they should be looking to sign him, but if you're not willing to pay him what he wants, why have you fought yourself so much on this? Like, either make a decision, say, all right, you're worth what you want to be paid. We'll pay you exactly what you want. Let's just get this over with so we can focus on winning a Super Bowl, or get him out of town so you can focus on replacing him. Because that's the biggest thing here is he hasn't been a part of the team, so they are getting a good look at what it's going to look like without him, but they could be focusing on, okay, how can we adjust the offense in a way where maybe we can get as much out of it as we can without his skill set here. They kind of are in with 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and I don't think that's the right way to do this. Pay him what he wants on the length of contract he wants, or move on with your life, basically. Like, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and we've just been at that stalemate for a while now. The 49ers are willing to pay him twice annually what he's making on the 5th-year option, which is $14 million and change. That still isn't quite the number that he wants to see. And so I think that the San Francisco's got to get that number up to like the $31 million mark. And if you do the math here on, like, when
it's
after
like
taxes and everything
here,
the Steelers, $28 million in Pennsylvania and in California, they're not the same. And so that's why he would be willing to take less for the Steelers, knowing that you're not going to get as much taken out.
He's still going to get the same amount of money, is basically what it comes down to either way. It's like, it's just they need to pay him more on the cap and in their guarantees than he's going to get from the Steelers. So,
yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to that initial report that we heard and that I heard personally was that $28 million is what we're looking at per year value that the Pittsburgh Steelers would be offering him, as well as a 2nd-round pick and a player to go with the deal. We don't know who that player would be, what they want in exchange. I mean, the prices just differed throughout this, and we've heard so many things dating back to, obviously, they were asking for a 1st-round pick before the draft. Now it looks like a 2nd-round pick and a player that can help them win right now, which I understand why the 49ers would want that. If you're losing a player that's going to help you win right now, you're going to want someone else who can kind of soften that blow a little bit. So we'll see where this thing all ends. I'm kind of sick of it. Honestly, we've just been covering it so much.
Yeah, I'd much rather just have a decision made.
So but, I agree too. And I think that whatever happens, like, I just want it to be done at this point. I want to see an outcome here so that we can move on. We can focus on football because there's so much going on already, so much about to go on as the season kicks off here in a couple of weeks. So hopefully we have a conclusion by then. And what I was told was the 49ers want to wash their hands of this situation by the start of the season. We'll see if that happens or if they come to agreements and they are the ones that end up ultimately signing him to this extension. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll have another up and down and back and forth with this again by next week's show.
Probably.
All right, let's talk about the Steelers versus Texans game here, Shayne. Their first preseason game of the year was not spectacular. I mean, again, this is not about box score numbers. It's not about the final score. Yes, the Steelers were down 17-0 going into the first half. That's not what you want to see either, because obviously you want to see your starters fare better than this. A couple of factors in play, though, here I think that must be addressed is the Texans already had their warm-up game. They played in the Hall of Fame game, so they were they started training camp a week earlier than the Steelers did. So they had that kind of warm-up experience already. They played their starters. The Steelers rested basically all of their best guys, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick. I mean, there's a bunch of guys not playing in this contest. So, and a lot of these guys are playing with each other for the first time, at least in an exhibition action. We're talking about Justin Fields. Obviously, Russell Wilson didn't play last week. But what are some of like the biggest notable performances from that first week? And we've got to talk about a guy like Justin Fields. Like I've heard just mixed reports. I went back and I watched this game 2 times, but I also go and I watched it on my computer. The second time through, I hit the 5-second button back and I watch every player for pretty much every snap. And I want to see how they look the second time around. You just gain so much more from this. I don't think that Justin Fields played all that bad. Now you got to put points on the board. You got to have clean exchanges, and scoring is obviously the most important thing. Would have won a perfect 6 for 6, about 8 yards an attempt. Mike Tomlin chose not to challenge the Van Jefferson catch, and it is what it is. I mean, it's leave it to Tomlin to not challenge at the right time, and maybe figure it's preseason. We want to see what you're going to do in a situation had we not gotten that play. So what do you make of Fields' performance in his first preseason game with the Steelers?
I think it was a microcosm of Justin Fields as a player and what he's been in the NFL, which is the flashes as a passer were there, where he made some really nice throws with velocity and be able to get the ball to where it needed to be. He had some throws, especially that one to Jefferson, that would have been a very easy completion had he not left it behind him. And there was the fumbles, which again, how much of that is on him versus Herbig? It's kind of hard to say for sure, but those blunders were there. Some bad sacks where like he wasn't able to escape pressure despite his athleticism. It's not all on him, but again, when he's under pressure, he's probably going to fold. That's just kind of what it is with him right now. Or he's going to break away and make a great play. It's kind of an if or there. But this is what Justin Fields is. Like, this is what he's been. If you're willing to live with it, then I think he can still be a starting quarterback with this type of play, but it's going to be much more inconsistent. Now, again, you're going to actually get the highs that we haven't gotten from the quarterback position. Mm-hmm. And some of the lows might be even lower, but probably not that much lower when you consider what we were dealing with the last few years. But again, like, he is the high variance, like really explosive starting caliber quarterback that could win you a game and could also lose you a game. So that's what I think he is right now. And I think it's probably what he's going to remain with the Steelers if he does play a lot.
Yeah, I don't see that changing a lot either, Shayne. And it's kind of just the player that he is. You don't want to take away what he does well. You just wish that you could clean up some of the stuff.
Just a few things.
Could do better. Yep, holding onto the ball too long. That was kind of my takeaway as well. I don't think it's one extreme or the other where it's like,
nothing about that game changed what I thought about the situation.
No, for sure not. And it was, I mean, all things considered, playing with a new team for the first time, playing against the Texans starters, not having all of your guys, though, basically everybody, Siumalo was out of the lineup. There's going to be some gelling that needs to take place and some chemistry that needs to develop. I'm not concerned about it at all. No. Sure, you want to put them in the losers category for that game, fine, whatever. The exchanges can't happen like that. And I would assume more on Herbig than on Fields, just because the nature of the center position, the lack of experience Herbig has there. But again, we don't know exactly what happened there as well. Some of the other ones I wanted to highlight, Shayne, and this is from my stock report article. You can read it on stillcurtain.com. Players I thought played really well. George Pickens, for obvious reason. He looks like that guy. I mean, his play time was limited, but he looks like he is that number one receiving option. Darnell Washington was amazing as a blocker in this game. Zach Frazier was awesome. The guy just knows what to do. Like he plays like a 9-year veteran already when it comes to, all right, I'm going to pass this guy off. I'm going to get to the second level. Like he's got control of that offensive line. Nothing stands out about his game really to me in terms of like I'm just going to maul you over type of player, but he seems far along already and looks poised to start. Corey Trice Jr. I thought was really impressive. I scratched my head wondering why this guy didn't play until late in the game. And when he did play, he allowed -2 yards in coverage, had a TFL on the only time that he was targeted, and just looked super sound. And so you want to see him get more work with the upper guys there. Both running backs, Dejon Edwards and Jonathan Ward, both had big runs in this game. They both look really solid. Edwards averaged 9.3 yards a carry, scored a touchdown on 3 carries. So it's a really small sample size, and it came in the second half. But maybe that's enough to kind of give him some more work and to kind of have the coaching staff scratching their minds here and saying, let's see, maybe we can see what he's got here. Because I was not impressed with P. Ryan. So DeMarvin Leal, another good performance. He has been a training camp star this year. Kyron Johnson looked really explosive. Calvin Austin had 2 big plays. One was called back, should have had a touchdown. I know that one's bizarre to me. Sure, he might not have ran the best corner route, but Kyle Allen just got to loft that ball up there. There's nobody over there. I know he's making how did you see that, Shane? Because to me, that looked more on Allen than it did on Austin. So am I reading that the wrong way?
I think ideally you'd like your receiver to still make the play, but I think almost any other receiver on the team would be better off being the guy to target if you're going to throw a ball like that, except for Calvin Austin. So it's like some of it is on Austin in the sense that you'd like a guy to be able to make that play. But Allen also really did a bad job of giving a good ball on a wide open play. And I understand he's trying to get it out and up so you can just run under it, not have to worry about the coverage. But you can lay off a little bit and let him just catch it before it gets to the side of the end zone. Like it was a bad throw and a catch that only really, really good receivers are probably going to make, and more particularly receivers that aren't 5'7.5". So that doesn't help either. So
it doesn't help. It
a little bit of both, but mostly Allen, I would say.
Yep. And then only after that, I've got Scotty Miller as well, had a 38-yard reception in this game. And again, kind of being able to exploit defenses with big chunk plays like that. That's really important stuff. So those are my players whose stock is rising after that game. Shane, is there anybody that you want to expand on or add to that list?
I mean, I think that DeMarvin Leal had a really good game, and he kind of is continuing his good play that we saw in training camp that's been reported, where I think he's really solidifying himself as one of the guys that is going to be on this team and can have multiple roles on the defensive line. And we know we need that depth because some of the guys who brought in over the last years have not exactly been great. Like, I think Ogunjobi, if he doesn't play better this year, I could see him losing snaps to him kind of early in the season. Based on just what we saw from him last year. Like, obviously, Leal was also not great last year. That's why he was inactive a lot of times. But I think if he's turning a corner a little bit here, I think he could still snaps from him. I think in some packages, you could see him being an edge as like a run defending edge because he's the bigger body type. Like, I could see them using him a lot of ways, and he's playing well enough to justify giving him snaps on defense.
Yeah, and he's one that too that I actually just am in the process of writing an article right now. What are they doing with him? I mean, is you playing him on
his position? Yeah.
I think that you're spreading this guy too thin. He just turned 23 years old. He was one of the youngest players when he was drafted.
Yeah.
And he was kind of a guy that we knew when he was drafted, he was stuck in between positions. In my opinion, Shane, and I know that maybe he's better as an edge, but when you just look at the package, it's like you've got a guy that runs a 5-second 40. Can he really be a player that plays on the edge with success there? Like, I think
not full time.
His best route to the quarterback, in my opinion, make him a knifing 3 technique who can just shoot the A gap and try to use his quickness and bend to get after the quarterback, because I think it's going to be a failed experiment trying to move him all up and down this line. And he's a guy that's truly on the roster bubble with the depth outlook of the Steelers right now on the defensive line. So I just don't know what the plan is with him. They're kind of just experimenting all over the place, but I agree. He was on the winners list for there for sure. Some of the names who were not impressive in this game, Quez Watkins. If you want to see just the worst display of punt returning ever, go look at my Twitter. I cut up some of his plays. There was 23 yards of separation. And I don't know if Tomlin ever addressed this or not. I actually didn't listen to the post game at all. There's 23 yards of separation between Watkins and the next guy of any play from either team when Watkins fair caught that first one. And then the second one, he seems to try to make up for it by running and trying to do the over the shoulder catch. I mean, that's a fireable offense. So you can see why. I think a lot of people are under the misconception that this guy's a punt returner. He has 0 career punt returns in his first 4 years with the Eagles. He had some kick returns, no punt returns, and you can see why.
Yeah, he a note to any potential punt returners at any level of football. If you have to stop facing the defense to catch the ball, just don't do that. Just don't catch it. At least not on the initial catch. Like if you can corral it and there's no one around you yet and you can pick it up and run with it, great. But if you have to turn around, the play is over. Just don't, because like the odds of it going well are so low that it's almost like, all right, do we really want to bother doing this? Like, just let it go. Realistically. That's my biggest thing there. But like in general, Watkins is not a punt returner. I think they just wanted to try to take advantage of his speed. Because that's really kind of the only thing that he's done at the NFL level is be fast. And yeah, it doesn't matter if you're fast, if you're running backwards trying to catch the ball. So,
and honestly, that might be the dagger for him, really, because he was so firmly on that bubble anyway, that with Scotty Miller having a good game and him having just a abysmal performance on special teams did nothing. I mean, there were 16, 18 players that caught a pass. He was not one of them. In this game for the Steelers. And so definitely did nothing to help his cause there. Beanie Bishop, we talked about him briefly, kind of had a rough go here in his first ever preseason game. Not what you wanted to see for sure. So that was another name. Nate Herbig, we talked about the botched snaps there. Broderick Jones didn't have a good game. And I hate to say this because I'm a Broderick Jones fan. I like the tools, the upside, the strength, everything coming out of Georgia. But this was a forgettable first preseason performance. Having said that, they got to stick him at left tackle and play him there. Like that is the plan. And I know we've said this before. Stop flip-flopping him around. He's too raw of a player to begin with to make him try to learn both positions. And then one series you're playing right tackle, the next you're kicking over to left tackle and you're doing inverted kick slide. Like he doesn't need that on his play. If you're already declaring, and Jerry Dulac of the Post-Gazette did, that Fawatanu is going to be the starting right tackle as soon as he returns from this knee injury, put Broderick at left and stop messing around with it. And I've said this all along, and it just seems so common sense to me, but make the veteran, the unspectacular veteran, be the guy who is your swing tackle. If he can't do it, then keep it Dylan Cook or find someone who can play that right tackle spot, because you should not be jeopardizing the upside and the potential of Broderick to appease your guy that's not going to start very long at left tackle, even if he does start the season.
That's at this point, like we talked about it before, about had kind of a rant about that situation. And I was like, well, I definitely agree with you, but also like, yeah, let's see what's going on in a couple weeks. Well, it's still happening. So at this point, like you said, I actually do think the best thing they could have done, because Broderick got real game action at right tackle last year, would have been to keep him at right and let Fawatanu play left. That would have probably been my preferred thing. However, if you're not going to do that, like you said, I get it, because Fawatanu has the athletic ability, and I think he's capable of learning right tackle and playing it very well. Broderick is a left tackle, is what he spent most of his time in college doing, obviously, if not all of his time. You have to play him there every single snap that is available to him in the preseason, in training camp, and every form facet you can. And if you aren't doing that, then you were just messing with him at this point. Like you were actively hurting his ability to be the tackle that you drafted in the first half of the first round. And until that stops happening, this offensive line that I think has a lot of promise and that I have a lot of expectations for, probably isn't going to be as good as it should be. And the Steelers have no one but themselves to blame in that situation. Like that's where we're at with it.
Yeah, and I cut up at least 4 reps of him, and they were on both sides, left tackle and right tackle. That he just, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was he just laid off the ball, lazy footwork. It just was sloppy. It did not look good. And so he's one of those guys that obviously we're going to be looking for that improvement in this next game here. And then Michael P. Ryan, when you were averaging 2 yards a carry with guys like Dejon Edwards and John Ward, breaking off big runs, like that's not going to help your cause at all. And this guy, I mean, he's the veteran of that group that's not projected to make the roster, but even pushing for a practice squad spot, if you want to solidify yourself there, if Najee Warren were to get injured and you want to be the guy that's brought up and carve out a few carries here and there, didn't do anything to help himself there. Any other performances you want to note before we go on to our next discussion topic, Shayne?
We don't have to talk about him, but Anthony Everett's probably done. Almost, I think it was almost touchdown, or maybe it would have been no, it was a touchdown to Tank.
There was a
he was just like not even in the straight, like he was right there, and then he just zoomed past him, like not even close. So I think he's done.
Which falls right in line with what we've saw with from Averett with the Raiders, and I mean he's just not a guy that's got a lot of potential upside anything at this point. So that was not a good rep from him at all. Any chats you want to get to before we move on to our next?
There's a couple just talking about with Justin Fields. Not saying you guys, but everyone killing Fields for doing more than 7 passes than Kenny in 3/4 of 70% of his games. Yeah, that's part of it. I mean, you can't grade on that scale if you want to actually be good, but I do understand that perspective. We have a couple chats from Paranormal in the Funhouse. Is a fun name. Any news on BA? We talked about it briefly. Nothing that hasn't already been reported. You're kind of probably up to speed if you've seen that. Essentially, it's the Niners either willing to pay him more or trading him to us. It's basically where it's
ball's in their court right now, and there is a trade on the table. So it's just whether or not they want to execute it.
Pretty much. And then I saw Pickens had an interview. My thoughts on his interview about BA, he did not seem to like it. I'm not sure if he's talking about the one where they asked him if they need help at receiver, like way back in the beginning of training camp, or if maybe we missed something. I haven't seen an interview about it, but again, I think he'll get over it and they'll figure it out if it happens. But at this point, until it happens, I think we can all just say we'll worry about it when it happens.
Yeah, I think that's where we are at this point. If you want more Brandon Ayuk content, we've talked about him so much, over the last several months. So we touched on everything, and that was our entire show last week. So you can go pretty much hear if you want to hear all of our thoughts on whether you can go back or not. Yeah, go back and watch last week's show because we covered that for like an hour on there. We did. Yeah. All right, Shayne, let's move on to the next topic. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, let's talk Steelers versus Bills preseason week 2. I just rewind, strike that, reverse it. I'm going to pull a Willy Wonka here. Let's talk about winners and losers from training camp first, because I skipped right over that one. Training camp wrapped up today, last day. They have a padded practice tomorrow with the Buffalo Bills, a joint practice with them. Not open to the public. So I'm interested to hear about how that goes. But let's talk about everything that we've learned now over the entire course of training camp, which is officially wrapped up in Latrobe. Let's talk about the winners and losers here. Now, I did not get to be on here.
We didn't get to go this year. I had a lot of stuff going on. Tommy was busy with stuff. So fortunately nothing directly from our eyes, at least not in person. But we did a
lot of secondhand stuff. And there's, I mean, all over Twitter from all the beat reporters, from everybody that was logging the things that were going on at camp this year. We'll do our best to give our winners and losers list. Typically I am there. I think I've gone like 8 of the last 9 years, and I just didn't get a chance. It didn't line up in my schedule to go down this year. But let's talk about the things that we do know and the things that we have heard from camp, what we have seen at least from everybody that's covered it so far. So let's talk about the winners first. We'll go over to the losers. My winners list, Shayne, I've got Justin Fields, basically because of that added rep time that he would have not gotten otherwise had Russell Wilson not been injured. Van Jefferson surprised everybody at camp this year, I think, with how solid he was. I wouldn't read too much into it. It's training camp. He's a savvy veteran. He's going to look good in these types of situations, but he definitely didn't hurt himself here. I would consider him, and I don't like saying this with players that I don't feel 100% sure about, but I think he's a roster lock for this team, and we didn't know if he would be otherwise. I think Mason McCormick, Zach Frazier, the rookies, interior offensive linemen, both had really strong camps. Frazier looked awesome in team sessions. McCormick, I mean, he had chances to go against Cam Hayward in one-on-one drills. That's how impressive he was, that they gave him that opportunity at least. And he got bullied by Cam, but he was able to do it still. DeMarvin Leal had another great camp, seems to be one of the preseason stars of camp this year. Did run a lot, though, with the second and third team, so kind of beating up on scrubs a little bit, but it's what you want to see at least. He
has
still
to do
performed
that
really
to
well.
even have a chance to play, like we talked about. Like, he has to be able to show that against those guys to get the chance to be in the first team.
Definitely. Yeah, Nick Herbig, we expected him to be the third edge on this team, but just ran away with it with flying colors. Nobody's close to him right now. He is going to be the first guy off the bench for TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith, as if there was any doubt. But a really strong camp from him, continues to flash his speed, quickness, his bend, all that kind of stuff. Peyton Wilson, again, same type of reasons. Just a guy is flashy. Like, he flies to the ball. You could see it in the first quarter of that preseason game, slipping blocks, knowing where to be, a good feel for angles, good feel for the game. Had a really strong camp overall. It wasn't perfect, but you can see all the potential there. And then Corey Trice, just a guy, when you don't hear about him, he's typically performing well in coverage. And when you do hear about him this week, finally, he was getting those first team reps with the Pittsburgh Steelers as Dante Jackson nursed an injury. And we don't know what I don't know if his has been disclosed yet or not. But last I knew it was not disclosed. So getting work opposite of Joey Porter, that's exactly what you want to see from a 6'3" corner who's a 96th percentile athlete with all this upside and everything everybody hoped he could be coming out. Obviously, he's got a ton to prove. Hasn't proven anything in the regular season yet, but he was certainly trending the right way all camp, and he's looking as good as ever right now. So those are my winners, Shayne. Is there anybody that you wanted to add to that list for training camp?
There is a guy that was trending this way, but I think his performance in the preseason game and also some of the stuff that happened after, where he lost some starting reps to, unfortunately, now injured Grayson Arnold, Beanie Bishop, I think would have been here for sure, the way he was playing for a while, and then just didn't fully come together with when you factor in the preseason game, like you said, and coverage was not really sticky enough at all, kind of was all over the place. And then losing some reps at starting nickel is definitely unfortunately not enough to make him a loser, I don't think, but he definitely is kind of back to like, all right, what do we have with this guy?
Yeah, I would agree, especially starting off. Like, anytime that you can go from off-season programs and then from the gate, right, the start of training camp as an undrafted rookie being slotted in with that first team, that's impressive stuff. It didn't really build as camp went on. In his first preseason game, he kind of struggled there, but I think that's one worth consideration as well. Let's go over to the losers list here. I don't want to call these guys losers. They're still the best football players in the world.
Right. Some of these guys,
the highest level of competition.
It's more circumstantial than anything, really.
But that is why these first four names are on this list: Russell Wilson, Roman Wilson, Troy Fautanu, Dean Lowry, all injury related. And so Russell Wilson's because maybe Fields got a little bit of a leg up on that competition, or at least made it tighter there with him being absent so long. And it just starting camp with a calf injury and not really getting into action like a couple weeks into camp before you were like a full go, missing the first preseason game. Like, all those things are setbacks when you've got a quarterback, a polarizing athletic quarterback who's 10 years younger than you, sitting behind you, who's coming off of his best NFL season. Like, it was a kind of a storm against Russell Wilson, if you will, for how things turned out with him. Obviously, there's the team is still going to get to see him at practice. We won't anymore from training camp. And then he's going to have, if he sits out this game, I don't know what his status is going to be if he plays or if he sits out, but he's going to have at best like a quarter of action to prove himself before the season starts. So his setback was big. Roman Wilson's even bigger in his situation because this was a guy who was potentially the Steelers' number 2 receiver as a rookie. And now he's going to get buried on this depth chart because when you are a third-round rookie and you don't practice, he got literally injured the first padded practice of training camp and wasn't able to finish that practice. And so hasn't practiced since then. This is a guy who now is going to go from being a potential wide receiver 2 for the Steelers all the way down to maybe wide receiver 5 to start his career. And they're just going to kind of have to ease him into action early in the season and see how he does from there. So that big setback from him. Troy Fautanu, not quite as big of a setback. Obviously, if Dulac thinks that the job is his when he comes back at right tackle. But still, you don't want to lose a couple weeks worth of reps. You don't want to lose preseason action time. And then Dean Lowry, the other injury one here, just this past week, getting back on the field for the first time at Steelers training camp with a new team. He was on the Vikings before. And so finally getting up to speed, getting acclimated as like a 30-year-old guy in a tight race at that defensive line group, guys all trying to vie for playing time here. He would have obviously liked to have been here sooner to show the Steelers what he's got.
Yeah, I mean, those guys in particular you feel bad for because, with Wilson, luckily for him, like I think that barring like a true like switch of the hand at quarterback here, which there is, and we'll talk about with the Bills game and what to watch for, there is questions about who's starting that game, which unless Wilson is really not ready to play in a game setting yet, which doesn't seem to be the case as far as I understand. The last thing I saw was that he's ahead of schedule with it. If he's ready to play and they don't start him in this game, what are we supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
Is that, what is our takeaway supposed to be? Because unless you're planning on starting Fields, giving him like a quarter, and then you give the other quarter to Wilson where all the starters are still in an offense, then okay, I don't know why you don't do the opposite if you're trying to convey that Russell Wilson's a starting quarterback. But whatever, I guess it doesn't matter that much. But it's just a weird situation right now with him where like we kind of assumed that he was going to be the starter. Not saying I necessarily want that to remain the case, but I assumed it. And now we're not really 100% certain on that. And then, of course, other Wilson here, Roman, it's just really disappointing to not be able to get a good look at him before the season starts. I do think he's going to climb the ranks as the season goes on. But like you said, he's probably not going to start there just because he hasn't played enough for them to get an idea of where he's at, right? So it's unfortunate for him. Fatano, I think, will be good to go when he gets back. I think we kind of, like said, there's so many reports of him being the right tackle. I'm not really worried about that. And then Dean Lowry is a veteran guy that, like, assuming he gets healthy, I think he has a spot on the team. But if he doesn't by the start of the season, maybe they just say, all right, well, Logan Lee, you're up, basically. And he's another guy on this list that hasn't really done much, but maybe he just has to make the team for that reason.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Some of the other guys on this list, not injury related, Kyle Allen started off strong and then kind of tapered off after that. Like these last couple of weeks have been less than impressive. The preseason game, some really up and down moments there. The Quez Watkins, not a lot, not a lot of positives to note from his game. I was never excited about that signing. No. It just hasn't done anything to change my mind. Logan Lee, that hasn't been that it's been bad with Logan Lee. It's just that he's done nothing to stand himself out in a super crowded defensive line group because, realistically, he's fighting for a job with Isaiah Loudermilk and DeMarvin Leal, guys who have more experience, who've done more so far. Is it going to be enough to get a job? And I think that's a legitimate question. I think that, at this rate, he might be destined for the practice squad to start his career. Mark Robinson, although he does get the benefit of Cole Holcomb's absence, and I would talk about that if we get to our 53-man roster prediction today. It's still, you can just exploit the guy too easily. I'm sorry. He's a short, compact linebacker. He's kind of stiff in the hips. If he doesn't get on you right away, like it's easy to make a miss in coverage. He takes questionable angles sometimes. Just have not been pleased with what I've seen with him. I think if he makes the team, you're getting him as that guy that can carve out a couple hundred special team snaps and nothing really more. And then Darius Rush, just because Corey Trice has looked really good, and Rush has kind of gone the opposite way where he has been up and down. I would say losing footing a little bit in that boundary cornerback race. So that's why I would have him on the losers list. I know a couple others thought the same with him out there as well. Is there anybody that you would add to that, Shayne?
I don't want to harp on the guy, but again, Anthony Averett just doesn't do it for me, and I don't think he's got a spot. But again, he's a veteran that hasn't played in over a year and kind of expected that, honestly. I think they just brought him in as a depth piece in case that they didn't feel good about the younger guys, but it seems like that's the case. Again, like the back end of the roster is interesting for the Steelers this year because there's a lot of guys who are like, they're not playing bad, but like you don't see anything from them that makes you think that if they had to play that they would do a whole lot of anything. So it's like, and that's the case for most teams, right? Like most teams don't have guys sitting at like the 52nd spot on the depth chart or on the roster being like, oh, I'd love to see that guy get in the game. Like, this just doesn't really happen usually, so it's not really that big
Yeah.
of a deal. But I think in general, like camp is, I think the Steelers have had a really good camp overall. Like the injuries have been annoying, but like that happens to everybody. Could be worse. I just saw that. Just a little bit of breaking news, but not really since it's Steelers stuff here. But J.J. McCarthy will miss his entire rookie season for the Vikings, torn meniscus, so that sucks for them. But like outside of stuff like that, it's been, I think, a pretty good camp for the Steelers overall.
Yeah. Okay. And going back to the Anthony Averett thing, Shayne, I'm always like, the competition is close. Give it to the younger guy with more upside. Like we've seen Averett for years in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
He has an extensive injury history. He's been bad when he's played. Like, what's the upside if you keep him around? Like, I understand that the Steelers always operate in the here and now. Like, it's all about winning for this season.
Yeah.
But if you think that the race is close, like between an Averett or a Darius Rush, give the edge to Rush. I mean, at least the guy is unproven and could potentially do more if given the opportunity. So that's
at least
my
chase down a receiver that he let get the ball instead of Averett, who just lets him catch it and then doesn't chase him down.
Yeah,
so it's like, I don't know.
There are definitely players like that I'm definitely not thrilled about the potential, the idea of making the 53-man roster. So we'll see how that plays out. And we're getting a pretty clear idea at this point. We'll have a really clear idea after the third preseason game of how things are going to unfold. Anything else you want to get to, Shayne, before we move to our next topic here?
No, I think again, like the camp has been pretty good overall. Like a lot of the losers are unfortunately just injury situations, and we'll see what happens. But it's unfortunate for those guys.
All right, let's talk about the Steelers versus Bills preseason week 2 preview. A rematch of the AFC wildcard game. Obviously, far less at stake this time around. Both teams are just hoping to escape this game without any major injuries. That's what everybody tries to do in the preseason. But since going to the 17-game regular season schedule in 2021, we've cut back a preseason game. So now there's 3 preseason games. That middle one, that week 2 of the preseason, is when most teams deploy their starters for the longest period of time. And that way, by when the third week of the preseason rolls around, you can kind of play your scrub, see who's going to take those last 4 or 5 spots on the roster. And then give a week of rest, an additional week of rest to those guys before the start of the season. So I would expect to see the starters the most this week. I don't know. Like personally, I do not care if TJ Watt suits up at all this preseason. There's certain guys, it's like, I don't need to see you out there. Like it's not worth the risk. For others though, it's like, all right, I can see why you'd want your starting offensive line out there. Obviously gel, get some chemistry. I need to see Russell Wilson. I mean, we got to see Russell Wilson at some point. You can't just throw him in the Atlanta game on the road in week 1 if he's not playing in the preseason. So there are guys that I want to see out there and see how they perform. What are some of the things that you're looking for, Shayne? And let me start by asking, which guys would you rest completely this game? Is there anybody outside of Watt that you're like, all right, I don't need to see you at all? Watt and Hayward, maybe?
Hayward for sure, just an age, and also we know what you are thing. I don't need to see Minkah Fitzpatrick play football until it matters. I really don't. He's had his own injury issues. Don't need him to turn and run on a post route and tweak his hamstring. I really don't need that to see that. I would say that I would argue I don't need to see much from the starting running backs because we know those two are going to carry such a load. Like I don't really know if I need to see a ton of them. Like obviously you want to see them with the first group for a little bit, kind of make sure they're warmed up, get some hits on them because the running backs like that. But they're going to play though, and I'd want them to play a little bit. And especially until we find out if Ayuk is going to play, I also don't know if I want to see Pickens out there a lot just because if he goes down, we're kind of screwed. So like maybe that's more of just a safety thing than anything else. I still want to see him, but whatever. But in general, like I am one of those people where I think you definitely want to see your main guys out there for a little while, especially offensively. I think more so than anything else because historically offenses start a little bit slow just because there's so much more to think about and so much that you're trying to figure out offensively. Whereas defensively, it kind of allows you to play like a little bit more free if you're not worrying about stuff as much. So I'd want to see the offense play a lot. Defense, honestly, don't need to see a ton from the main guys, especially.
Yeah, I would agree with that list completely. I mean, you said it with the Pickens thing. Like, it makes me wonder if the 49ers would take their offer off the table or say, hey, we're going to up the ante now that you got your number 1 receiver injured. If something like that were to happen, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Obviously, you don't want to see injuries. Performance-wise, though, Shayne, like what guys do you have to see more from? And my mind goes straight to Broderick Jones. And we talked about him already. Like, this is your left tackle of the future. When you drafted this guy, you traded up in the first round of the 2023 NFL draft to the 14th overall pick to select him. You've got to see more from him. You can't have 4 or 5 really ugly reps a game, even if the rest of the game looks fine. And there were some nice things that he did. I mean, he had some nice double team blocks where he bounced back and forth, good solid punch on a few of those reps, but you can't have the bad mixed in with that when you're at a position who is supposed to be consistent. So I need to see him do better in this game. And I know it's not going to happen with Fautano's injury, but I would have loved to see him just plug in at left tackle and play a half there, play the whole first half of the game at left tackle. He needs the reps. He needs that experience. I mean, he's a guy who is, I mean, Fautano had far more college opportunities than what Broderick did. And Broderick was sitting and learning behind a lot of these guys who were also NFL players, Jamari Salyer and Andrew Thomas. And so when he got there, he just didn't have the same opportunities. So Fautano ended up with like twice as many college snaps as what Broderick did. So I want to see him just plugged in that spot in playing. Unfortunately, I bet by the outlook, it looks like he's going to be back at right tackle again, even though that's not the plan for him. So that's one guy I definitely want to see more from this week.
Yeah, I'd love to see more from him, but like you said, I don't know if those reps are going to matter at all by the time the season starts. I would rather stick Dylan Cook out at right tackle and just let Dan Moore sit on the bench until the second. Like, I'm sorry. At some point, you got to just be like, Dan, if you can't play right tackle, you're just not going to play football for us until you can. Yeah. Or in the preseason, we're trying to get our left tackle ready to go. He's going to play left tackle, and you're going to not play that. Like, that's kind of what I hate to say that, but like, this is ridiculous.
No, I think that there's some truth to that logic, though.
Like, I'd rather just stick anyone else at right tackle so that way you could play Broderick at left tackle. Honestly, if Dan Moore gets killed at right tackle every snap he's out there, if they make him play right tackle, good. That just confirms that he probably shouldn't be playing for you that much. Like, I just don't see the point of this anymore, but that's definitely a big thing. Frazier, I want to see a lot of snaps from, especially because unless Herbig is like not really actually hurt at all, and he's going to be all right soon, he needs all the reps he can get so he can start week 1, which is seemingly likely what's going to happen. Just the whole offensive line. Like, I just want to see a lot of reps from the guys who are expected to start. And also a lot of reps from McCormick in particular, because I think he's going to be, especially if Herbig's down for any consistent amount or like extended amount of time, he's going to be the guy that's the primary guard, maybe even center backup, really. So, like, you want to see that. The offensive line in general is just like there's so much happening right now where it's like I need to see these guys preferably at their spots they're actually going to play, though, which is what throws a wrench in this a little bit.
Yeah, McCormick was the name that I wanted to mention because he really popped out on tape for me when I watched it the second time, and I went through each of the linemen, each of those plays, watched him. It was not all good. Like, there were definitely some sloppy reps in there, and that's to be expected. You draft a guy from South Dakota State who's making the jump to the NFL, but man, does he look the part. And it's not just the number 66 making him look like David DeCastro out there. Like, he would just bully guys on certain plays, and he just has the perfect frame. Like, you can see his power. I cut up a play or two where he would stall out a defender pretty easily and then start trucking him back the other direction, creating that clean pocket for the quarterback. He was just dominant in some of the run fits that he had there. So he's a guy that's, man, if he can continue to progress and impress the Steelers like that, I don't see a reason why he couldn't compete for one of those starting guard jobs if, like, James Daniels leaves in free agency next year. I think that would be the most ideal situation. So hopefully we can continue to see growth from him. Shayne, I want to see the jumbled mess along the defensive line. Like, is Logan Lee going to do something? DeMarvin Leal. We saw Leal last week come up with the sack. Isaiah Loudermilk, Dean Lowry, even. Like, is Lowry a good enough player that we can ensure that he should have a roster spot on this team? Now, the Steelers, he's got a 2-year deal, so that would suggest that he will be on the roster. It's just that I need somebody to separate themselves amongst that group of 4 or 5 guys there at the bottom of the roster, see what they can do, because they're going to have some important decisions to make.
I agree. I think with Lowry, the thing with him is that he's a veteran and they love their veterans. And I think he is, like, if you look at his body of work, it is certainly better than the back end of the roster guys.
Yeah.
So I think, assuming that he's going to be healthy enough to start the season on the team and not have to sit out for a while, especially, I do think his roster spot's kind of secured already just because of what he's already done in the NFL, which has been a really good rotational defender on the interior. I think really the fight right now is between, like, Logan Lee and Isaiah Loudermilk. Like I think that's kind
Mhm.
of the really
Yeah.
big spot. I think Liao's done enough where I'd be very shocked if he's not on the team and also playing some amount of snaps regularly. It comes down like Loudermilk just hasn't done anything in his career.
Yeah.
Just straight up, just not trying to be mean
Mhm.
to the guy. Like just has not produced in any meaningful way. And Logan Lee is kind of a similar player, but I think he has better athletic upside, right? So it's kind of like,
Mhm.
is he a better player than him right now? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident he will be a better player than him by like halfway through the season if he gets any practice reps and can kind of get things going. So to me, it's really about those two. Do either of them flash at all? And if neither of them flash at all, I just go with the younger and more talented player at that point.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that's potentially the race is close enough that what happens in these final two preseason
It
games
could
could
matter.
maybe
Yeah, very
maybe
much.
sway the coaching staff and their outcome. Tomlin said that they're going to hold a lot of stock in what happens in the preseason, so we'll see if that proves to be the case. I think a couple other positions we look at here, that fourth edge spot is wide open. I think it's
Yeah.
right now a two-way race between Kyron Johnson and Jeremiah Moon. I think both have had good camps. Johnson's like that small, undersized, like true, like outside linebacker guy, not just like this big edge that is really explosive off the ball. Whereas Moon is like the long and strong type guy there. So two totally different body types.
Yeah.
We'll see who they ultimately end up going with. I think the race is really close though. And like on a roster projection, I think you could throw either guy in there and your guess would probably be as good as mine with that group. Have you seen anything from one of the two to suggest that you would go with one over the other?
I hate to say this, but I think it's kind of more just the body type. Honestly,
Yeah, no, I think
I
that's
think
fair.
Moon is probably would be my bet today because I think he
Okay.
just gives them more size,
Well,
and
and you
I
have Herbig
like
already, who is very
that's
undersized, if you will, at
right.
the position.
So
So,
like I'd like a guy that has a little bit more size to him than Kyron Johnson, at 6 foot,
mhm,
230 pounds. Like
yeah,
he's probably a better pass rusher realistically at this
mhm,
point if I had to like go between the two. But I think that Moon gives you a little bit more special teams value, and I think he also gives you more value as a run defender just with his size. So if I had to pick one of the two to stick on the roster, it'd probably be Moon. But it, like you said, it really, I don't think it's a huge difference between the two, and it's just going to come down to what they want to keep at the position.
yeah, and I think that's those guys could do something to separate themselves. But I
Yeah.
agree with you, Shane. I think that body type obviously would fit better what the Steelers need. And if
Yes.
something were to happen, you want to stash Kyron Johnson on the practice squad, bring him up, and then have him be a situational rusher or whatever.
Yeah.
If Highsmith went down or something that way, hopefully that doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
you know how it is. So,
Yeah.
um, let's talk about like from the Buffalo Bills side of things here. Is there any matchups that you're looking to see in this game? Like obviously we don't know how long any of these players are going to play into this contest. But is there anybody you want to see tested, like battle tested out there?
It's interesting because this Bills team is much different than last year's Bills team in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways, especially offensively. I would say like the turnover at receiver is very
Yeah,
interesting.
for
We're
sure.
losing two mostly like big play type of receivers in Diggs and Davis, and you're replacing them with they have like it feels like 7 slot receivers and then like
Yeah.
the rookie from
Keon
FSU,
Coleman.
yeah, Keon Coleman. It's
Yeah.
basically like 7 slot receivers, including the tight end Kincaid, and then him. So it's like I don't
Mm-hmm.
really know matchup wise. Like I'd like to see Shakir and see if whoever's playing in the slot can even sort of stay with him.
Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
had issues with that in the wild card game where he just bounced off of 8 tackles and scored on that one play. Like don't even want to think about that. But I want to see kind of how the corners hold up against this different look of receivers because I
Mm-hmm.
know it's going to be much different for the Bills. Pass rush, I want to see Dawkins against Herbig again because I know Herbig got him a couple times in that first that
Mm-hmm.
preseason game last year. So that'd be fun if you can get hit on him a couple times. In general, I want to see the defense kind of hold up well against this new look Bills offense because I think they did a really good job last year whenever they, especially the preseason game. I will say this preseason game is the one that one last year's one I went to, and I was like, oh, the team looks great. It doesn't matter, folks. I hate to break it to you. If we win this game
Yeah.
40-0, won't mean anything in two
Yeah.
weeks. Like So just want to throw that out there.
I think that is important to know. And it's an important reminder. It's not that you shouldn't watch the preseason. I think that you can gauge individual performances, see kind of where players are. But again, Kenny Pickett had a perfect 158.3 passer rating in the preseason last
Best
year.
preseason of all time.
It did not translate at all. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. One guy I'd be curious to see, what would the Steelers' answer be for a guy like a Dalton Kincaid, like a super dynamic route running tight end? Like if they were to get matched up, and they are going to match up against the Chiefs on Christmas Day, like what is your answer for this guy now? We know what they've tried to do in the past. Do they have someone they can deploy on that type of player?
I think if we're talking about in a man situation, it could be Queen or Elliott. I think would probably be my guess. Probably more likely Elliott against a Kincaid. But I think that it just matters how they do it, right? Because if you're just going to run zone, guys like Kincaid and Kelsey are just going to go away from you. Like you kind of have to, in my opinion, when it comes to defending those guys, you have to choose somebody to be the I'm running in every direction you run and you're not going to get away from me. I think against a Kincaid and a Kelsey, I'd want more of a safety type that has a little bit more quickness, a little bit more long speed. And then obviously Queen, great athlete, but again, he's not a safety, so it's a little different. Against probably like the bigger, more physical tight ends, you're probably looking at a guy like Queen that has a little bit more size, obviously, than the safety would have. So it's really just I want to see that too because I'm curious. But my bet is they're going to find a way to not do it good. I hate to say that. I feel like they're going to find a way not to do it.
Shayne, if this was game planning for like a regular season game, what I would want Terry Lawson to do is play inside out double coverage on Kincaid. Like that. You take away the safety valve, you take away Josh Allen's favorite option, no Stephon Diggs anymore. So you don't
force him to go down the field to guys.
You make Keon Coleman prove himself to you. And I know Shakir was good, but I would rather him do that. You got to take away the team's best option that way. So I'm interested to see this Bills team. It does look very different. Obviously, it still has one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So I want to see. I mean, one of the biggest things I want to see Allen out there as long as possible to give this Steelers defense a good test. I want to see Corey Trice Jr. playing with the first team defense this week and seeing how long he can stick out there. And if he can be consistent in coverage and show all the things that you want to see from a young, talented guy like that. So
him and Keon Coleman matchups would be really funny because it's like two 6'3" guys just running around out there. So it'd be fun.
Yeah, I know. Is there anybody else from like the bottom of the roster, any roster bubble guys that you want to talk about, Shayne, before we get ready to wrap up today's show?
Yeah, we'll do our 53-man roster next week, which is probably a better idea to do it next week anyway, because we know a little bit more about kind of what we think solidifying wise. But honestly, the other thing I want to see, and this is kind of I just want to see Russell Wilson play and see what – this is not bottom of the roster guy, but we didn't talk too much about it. I want to see him start this game because I want to see what they really have in him, and I want to see if he's healthy and ready to go. If we don't see him at all, or if he plays second to Fields, it's going to be a media storm, right? Like we know that. And that's the thing that's so interesting is I think if he's healthy, if I was the Steelers, even if I'm considering moving to Fields, I'd let Wilson go out there first and just kind of show us what he can do with this full first unit, at least what's healthy and out there, and then let Fields go out with them too, just to kind of get him more reps with the first team and then make your decision from there, right? But if he doesn't if he doesn't start the game and he doesn't play at all possibly, it's going to start getting very interesting.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And I think that's the right way to do it too. We said this before. It's easier to go from Russell Wilson to Justin Fields than Justin Fields to Russell Wilson if you have to turn around and do it the other way. It's easier to go to the guy who's a decade younger rather than going back to the guy who turns 36 this year, who's coming off of 3 straight unspectacular seasons, the 3 worst seasons of his career. So I think that's the right approach, Shayne. I think if Russell Wilson is able and ready to go, he should be the guy going out there with the first team and then leave the first team in for a few series so that Justin Fields, you can get the same look at him with that offense and kind of just cross compare between the two, because they need to make a decision. I'm not opposed to going into the season with Wilson as the starter, even with limited reps, just because I think it's so much easier to turn to Fields than to go and turn back the other way around. Then you're basically saying at that point, all right, if Fields is not good enough for me, he's not going to be the future here. And that kind of experiment would be over at that point. So we'll see how it works out, but definitely keep an eye on those things during week 2 Steelers versus Bills, which is Saturday night at 7 p.m. Shayne, is there any chats that you want to get to before we get ready to
There
sign off
was a
here?
couple, and there's one thing I want to update on as well once we get there, but this was a big one. Can I ask? I know our thoughts don't matter ultimately, but you really,
Oh, sure they do.
yeah, right. But you really think Ayuk lives up to 26 to 30 million per year in the system? This philosophy with these quarterbacks, I don't. I'm assuming doesn't demand double teams, and we won't throw. And then he throws a little bit more here. Won't throw that much to make the money worth it. So here's the thing. I think when you trade for a guy like Ayuk, you don't trade for him because now, granted, the Steelers do stuff like this, but this is a different situation. You don't trade for him specifically because you think he's going to make the team much better this year. It's because it's a foundational piece for the offense moving forward. That if you find the quarterback that you want, whether it's one of these two or a different one, he now has weapons to throw to. Right, that's what this really is about. It's not about just trying to maximize this season. Not with a move like this. And more importantly, like I do think he's worth the money as a player individually. Now you can argue about like the scheme fit and the scheme itself and whether two receivers can kind of eat with inside of it. That's a whole other conversation. But just the actual transaction, if it takes place, is certainly worth it when you factor in how good the player you're getting is.
Yeah, it's a different conversation if you're saying, are the Steelers in that Super Bowl window? Are they ready to strike? But from a worth it standpoint, I do believe that he will be
in a vacuum,
26 to 28 or even $30 million per year based on what you're getting. He's not going to be a guy that averages 12 yards a target like he was able to do for San Francisco.
He probably would do it this year again because that just doesn't happen really much.
Like, I mean, it's really, really rare. You look at that like historically compared to like Calvin Johnson and those guys. That's just an elite number. And then again, Arthur Smith is the great value brand version of Shanahan. So you can't expect him to be the same efficient player that he was. It doesn't mean that he's a lesser player. It just means that his efficiency might take a little bit of a dip. But I think having him paired with George Pickens, like you couldn't ask for more from your quarterback situation. Like if the goal is to make sure that Justin Fields works out to be like the future quarterback of the team,
the best way,
or for Russell Wilson even to have a really solid season to get the Steelers back on a winning track in the playoffs, Brandon Ayuk is probably the best available option out there to do that. It slides everybody down a slot. You go from Ayuk's now your number 1. Pickens is now your number 2. Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson can share slot duties. You've got Van Jefferson just waiting as a depth option in case that you need him for injury's sake. So, things look a lot worse if you don't do that trade in terms now you have to bump everybody up a spot. So Van Jefferson's playing in number 2 when he shouldn't be, and in Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, that whole group is kind of fighting for what is their role. Where I think the roles become much more defined and easy to separate. If you bump everybody down a notch. So I do think that it is worth it from the mindset of it certainly makes the team better. There's no question that it does. The only question becomes, what's the trade compensation look like? Are you willing to part with a second round pick and maybe a conditional future pick, whatever ends up being, and a player? So, and do you think the Steelers are in that window of opportunity where they're able to strike? And I think that is completely justified to ask those questions. But yes, he does make the team better without a doubt in my mind. Anything else, Shayne?
No, honestly, the only other thing I wanted to mention, this is just something that was dropped in actually our Still Curtain chat on Twitter, is that apparently Brandon Ayuk is at 49ers practice in a red cutoff 49ers shirt. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if maybe he's saying goodbye to everybody. That's kind of what you'd hope for, I guess, if you're a Steelers fan. But so last thing I've seen on that is that he's apparently at practice. So that's interesting.
Okay. Well, we will keep tabs on that. And maybe, just maybe, Shayne,
just maybe,
months later, we will have some sort of confirmation as to what's happening by what time we record this show next week. All right. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Josh Yorish goes live on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. He's got special guests on there all the time, beat writers, and go check out his stuff. He just did a live show a couple of days ago. Good stuff there. Thank you all for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.